Welcome back to the Wild Lab, everybody. My name is Ned Weidner. Today I'm taking the mic on a solo episode to tell you a story about trust. What does it mean to trust? And what is trust, anyways? You see, these days I feel like trust is at an all-time low. It's harder and harder to find. Growing up, I used to remember that old Missouri standby, show me, right? I won't believe something until you show me. And that had a certain truth to it, right? Because as long as you could see it, as long as you could see whatever it is that they were talking about, it was real. But today, heck, that's not even the case, right? Today, I saw this AI video the other day with this lynx fighting this dog. And for a few minutes, I thought that it was real until I looked closer. And then I noticed like none of the animals were moving and the lynx was the same size as the dog. And I was fooled. I was fooled by something that I saw. And it brings me to some research that I've been thinking around trust. Like the other day, I was looking at some Pew Research stats that suggested that trust is at an all-time low. Trust in the media, trust in institutions, trust in facts, and some of it for good reason, right? Trust in other people, too, because similar stats show that Pew Research says that 34% of all Americans believe that other people can be trusted. 34%. That means something like 66% of people believe that 66% of people believe that they can't be trusted. That's the vast majority of people in this country believe that other people can't be trusted. And that's a problem. And while I don't have cold, hard Pew Research facts to back up what I'm going to say next, I do have a lot of anecdotal research that suggests that trust and our own selves is slipping too. Because many of you know, I teach college students. And the other day I asked them every semester, in fact, about their decision-making process. And I asked them how many of them consult AI before they make a decision. You want to know the answer to how many of them raised their hand? Yeah, 60%. I got about 25 students in the class, and the vast majority of them raised their hand when I asked them whether or not they used AI, ChatGPT, Gemini, or whatever. They consulted that before they made a decision. It's amazing to me how quickly we gave up our own power. We gave up our own belief in our own decision-making process, considering that those tools have only been around for a year or two, a couple of years, but only really been heavily used for the past year. And here's the thing, I'm a writing professor. I teach creative writing, I teach composition. And so I'm used to students outsourcing their writing process, where I don't love it, but I'm used to it. But not only are we outsourcing our writing process, but we're outsourcing our trust. And here's the problem with that. When we don't trust ourselves and we don't know how to trust ourselves, not only do we second guess our thoughts and hesitate before making decisions that, generally should feel natural, but we're unable to communicate how we feel and how we think, because we got to check what does ChatGPT think about this before I can have a thought. Not to mention, we're constantly bombarded with contradictory information on social media that turns our every thought into a performance. Every thought, a performance. This makes people doubt their own opinions even more, right? And yet, here's the thing. Trust in this world, in this society, in this culture that we live in has never been more important. Trusting other people leads to cooperation, it leads to community, it leads to friendships. It also leads to things getting done. When we work together effectively, we are much more efficient than when we work alone. Now, there's a key phrase in that, effectively, right? Because I understand a lot of you saying, well, I don't like to work with other people because it takes too much time and it's too difficult. Absolutely. But when we work effectively with other people, collaboratively with other people, we are more efficient than working alone. Many hands make light work, right? Similarly, trust in ourselves, it leads to confidence, it leads to self-love, and it leads to authenticity. It leads to being who the fuck you are, right? Now, let me tell you a story. about trust. And this story starts when I was training horses back in Clemens, California. It's this cool little town of about, I don't know, 156 people, including cats, dogs, and horses. Actually, if you include the cats, dogs, horses, and cattle, it's probably around 1,000 or so, maybe more, a couple thousand, especially if you include the cattle. But anyways, it's a little gold country town along the banks of the McCollum River in the foothills of the west slope of the Sierra Nevada. And I first moved out there. It was the first place that I moved when I moved to California. And at the time, I was riding a lot of problem horses, right? People would send me horses from all over North America, all over the country, and Canada, Mexico, you name it. Horses that they couldn't ride, that were biting them, kicking them, rearing, whatever. Horses that would cause problems, so to speak. Now, most of the problems weren't the horses at all, right? But that's a story for another day, another podcast, likely. On this particular day, I was riding a horse named Toby. He was this gorgeous animal, huge Oldenburg, warm blood. I think he was from outside of Sacramento. 17 hands, chest like a barrel, and a sorrel coat that shone like rust in the sun. He was gorgeous. But he'd been bucking his rider off, 20-something vet student from UC Davis. He'd been bucking her off for the past few months. And no one had been able to figure out why. He'd been to multiple trainers, and he was still bucking him off, or bucking her off. But the moment I met Toby, I held out my hand. Well, he got off the trailer, right? They pulled in the gravel driveway. They backed him down the trailer, and I walked up. He was on the lead, and I held out my hand with a mitt. As if you don't know about horses, many of them love mints, and it's a great way to endear yourself to one if you're just meeting one for the first time. So, anyways, I held out a welcome treat. And when I did, instead of eating the welcome treat, he tossed his head, right? And immediately when he did that, I knew what the horse needed. I knew that what he needed wasn't whips or chains or spurs. I knew that he needed to learn how to trust his rider, which of course is just as much a rider problem, a rider thing, as it is a horse thing. But at the time, I wasn't working with riders. So my job was to get Toby better. And maybe I would worry about the rider later. You see, this ranch I lived at was at the base of the dam in Lake Comanche. It's a huge lake and sprawling through with, dotted with oak trees and rolling golden hills of California. It's a beautiful place. And we could ride through those hills just a few miles back to the lake. And there's this old trick that I used to learn, and I learned it many times. I employed it, I should say, many times. From this old trainer named Bill up in Sonora. And Bill was part Indian, part German, and I was convinced he was part horse too. Anyways, he taught me this trick that sometimes it's best not to buck out a horse. Rather, it's best to create a safe space that the horse feels safe enough to not buck. Right? And according to Bill, there are many solutions to that. But one of the best ones, one of the ones that I like the most, was taking a horse neck deep into water, into a lake, whatever, and swimming. And so, thankfully, we had Lake Comanche. Now, I'd taken many a horse up to that lake and gained their trust and put sweaty saddle pads on them and kind of figured Toby would be the same. The first time I rode him up to the lake, I didn't think a whole lot of it because he was moving easy through the hills, right? Trotting up, loose and confident through the oaks. But given his background, it's this show jumping horse that probably lived 90% of his life in a stall with very little paddock time. I was pretty sure he hadn't seen a field or a big sky since he was colt, and he'd likely never seen water outside of his bucket his whole entire life. And you see, there was this one big hill that you had to come up over before you walked down to the lake, before the lake came in view. And we made it about halfway down that lake before he froze, maybe 50 yards from the shoreline. The air smelled like mud and tumbleweed and tarweed. A light breeze pushed ripples across the lake, and I could feel his heart beating through the saddle, just thumping away. His back went tight under me, his neck stiffened, his ears, they were pricked forward, ready at attention. I could feel the fear bolting through his body as his skin twitched and flinched. And over the years, riding many, many horses, I'd learned that sometimes it matters where the fear stems from, and sometimes all that matters is that we work out the fear. And I didn't know why Toby was afraid. I just knew I had to help him get over it. And as we neared the water's edge, Toby's muscles, they tightened even more. Each step, they tightened. And then each step, we stopped. And I would wait until the muscles in his back softened. And then we'd take another step. The last 50 or so yards before the lake were glacial. Step, wait, breathe, step, wait, breathe, step, wait, breathe. You get the ticket, right? You get the idea. But eventually, Toby and I were standing there perpendicular to the water's edge. My right hand and rein held his head so that he was turned towards the water, so he had to look at it. And I clasped my hand on my jeans so his head couldn't move, so to steady it. But his body quivered. His muscles were taut, and his teeth, I could feel them clenching around the bit. And I breathed and I hummed a little tune, as I often did when I could feel a horse getting excited. It was also probably a way for me to calm myself down. And I waited for him to relax. I waited for him to ease into position, for him to turn his entire body towards the water, to accept it. And once he did, I relaxed my hand, and I continued to hum. And then I waited some more time. This time, I waited for him to not just turn, but I waited for him to take that first step. That first step over the water's edge into the water. I gave him no other option. Any time he tried to turn left, I corrected him. If he tried to turn right, I stopped him. If he tried to back up, I pushed him forward. We were going to stand in front of that water until he made a choice to go into it. Now, I don't know how long it took. There was hawks soaring above us. There were wisps of clouds pushing past the clear blue sky, and the water was lapping at the shore. And every so often, a bass would jump from the lake and splash water down. Meanwhile, we would continue to wait. And on that day, I remember the sun was getting hot, sitting in the saddle. But I learned, and I have learned over time, you can't really force horses to do anything. We can ask them, we can prod them, we can even whip and beat them, but even if they submit, we haven't won, and they haven't been trained, they've just been broke. You see, over the years, I made a lot of mistakes with horses in my life. Sitting on top of Toby, I knew that if it was going to work, if we're going to work through this fear of trusting his rider, he had to choose to make the choice to trust. And it's then that I realized that trust isn't just a single leap. It's 1,000 tiny pauses where neither of you runs. Anyways, we're standing there at the water's edge, and he'd balk. I'd steady my seat. He'd breathe out. I'd drop my shoulders. We were having this conversation without words. And that's when I realized the horse wasn't the only one afraid of the next step. See, trust is a two-way street. One has to be given reason to trust, and the other has to provide the safe spaces. Him trusting me and his rider was as much about me as it was about anything else. It was about his rider as it was about him. So I breathed with him. Slowly and intently, I patted him on the neck, and I told him everything was going to be all right. I assured him that I had him, right? Now, I never know why a horse or a person or anything chooses to do anything, let alone why. But after what felt like days on the edge of that water and constant redirection and moving forward, Toby finally decided to take that first step in. And first his left foot, and I patted him on the neck and I praised him and told him he was a good boy, and then his right. And he got lots more praise, and then all of a sudden, he just leapt, all four legs leapt up off the ground, jumped up off the ground, and he leapt directly into the water. And I couldn't just help myself from laughing. I dropped my heels because like that's what you do when a horse wasn't bucking, he was leaping. But I dropped my heels, I tossed my head back, and I just laughed because he was making leap after leap after leap in the shallows. Toby had clearly made his choice. But after about 5 or 6 leaps, Toby settled. He pawed his hoof in the water, tossing his head, and then eventually he lowered his head and he took a drink. And eventually, I could feel the tension in his body leaving. I could feel his muscles easing. And I knew then that Toby was learning to trust. He was learning to trust me as a rider. And so, after some time, I asked him to walk a little bit deeper into the lake. That's what old Bill always said. He always said if you could get a horse to fully submerge and swim, their fear just might wash away. I don't know what it is. Something about the containment of the water that doesn't allow them to buck too hard to hurt themselves or you. And I think there's a safety to it as well, just being wrapped in the blanket of a water, if that makes sense. So I squeezed my legs and I directed him and his head towards the center of the lake. And he went pretty willingly. And then eventually he took a step and then another step. And then eventually there were no more steps to take. And eventually Toby's steps were not touching ground, but they were just touching water. And he was swimming. And Toby and I were swimming together in the lake. And he was calm. And he was doing it willingly. And we swam circle after circle after circle in that lake. And then we swam to the shore until each foot touched the ground slowly and surely. Finally, his next step, getting out of the ground or out of the water and onto dry ground. And finally, when he did, he shook himself off. And I don't know if you ever ridden a horse, been on a horse when he was super wet and he's trying to shake off, but it's a funny feeling because not only you, but that saddle shakes when the horse is shaking off all of his water. And when he was finished shaking, and when he had clearly calmed down, we walked back together to the barn. But something else happened when he came back to dry earth. Something in me softened too. Because here's the truth, I wasn't just training Toby, and that's the way it goes with horses oftentimes, is Toby was training me. He taught me that real trust isn't just about control. It's about presence and consistency. It's about holding steady when something chaotic, terrifying in me says to run. There's 1,000 tiny moments that offer us to run, 1,000 options to turn away. And staying anyways, that's trust, or it's part of it. And that day we took the long way back to the oak in the foothills, kind of meandering, and I was letting him just be a horse and do his thing, right? And as the sun hung low over Clemens and gold light just glistened across those rolling hills, Toby's ears flicked back towards me, a sign that he's paying attention to me, right? A sign that every so often he's checking in. Not because he's afraid, but because our relationship has shifted. We entered, before we were in the water, we were these two beings negotiating power, right? But we walked out as partners. We walked out trusting each other. And I remember thinking this as stride was loosening and we was walking through those tar fields. I just knew that is what trust feels like. This loose, reined, easy, confident walk of a horse is what trust feels like. And look, it's not a guarantee, trust isn't, but it's a willingness, right? The willingness to say, I don't know what happens next, but I'm here and I'm not running. I'm confident. So, what does all this talk about horses and me have to do with this moment in time? Well, everything, as far as I'm concerned. Because we live in a time where trust feels like a luxury, where it's hard to afford, hard to maintain, and where platforms are more trusted, bots are more trusted than people. Content is more trusted than instinct. The noise of social media is more trusted than our own quiet knowing. We're outsourcing our intuition. But here's the thing, trust, real trust. I learned from Toby that day. It starts with small risks, a first step towards the water, a conversation you're afraid to have, a decision you make without polling the damn algorithm, a boundary that you hold, a truth as you speak as your voice is shaking. But the truth is, and I think many of you are thinking it, there's a counter argument to all this patience and pausing. And I talk about it in some of my podcasts. In fact, I will talk about it in an upcoming one. But some will say that trust isn't built slowly. They'll tell you to go all in. They'll tell you to commit. They'll tell you to leap. They'll tell you to burn the damn boats, and trust will follow. And I get that. Look, I've burnt the boats. I've leapt. I have gone all in. And I think there's seasons where that's exactly what is demanded of us, right? And the truth is, those slogans look great on a t-shirt. And sometimes hesitation, that is exactly the problem. Sometimes waiting becomes a cage, right? It becomes this, I'm just waiting to build enough trust, enough money, enough XYZ until I feel comfortable enough to do the thing. And truth is, I've lived these jump and grow wings chapters in my life, flown by the seat, ridden by the seat of my pants more times than I can count. I've taken a job with no safety net. I've sold everything and moved to a different country. I've said yes to horses that scare the hell out of me. I've gone head first into the brambles, into the brush, into the tunnels, looking for bears that I knew might damn well kill me. I've risked my reputation, my comfort, and my security because something inside me said, if not now, when? Going all in can be holy. It can be sacred. It can crack you wide open. It can change your life. It changed mine. But here's the nuance that no one puts on a t-shirt. All in doesn't work if you haven't built the capacity to hold yourself on the way down. Let me say that again. All in doesn't work if you haven't built the capacity to hold yourself on the way down, because you're going to fail. 100% you are going to fail. And I don't mean that all your dreams aren't going to come true and that your dream isn't going to materialize. But what I mean is that you will definitely experience failure of some sort before your dream does actually materialize. In fact, it is a necessary element to the materialization of whatever the hell it is that you want to accomplish. And in my mind, all of those failures are just another small step. Plus, if you leap without groundedness, without a little inner trust, that jump can become violence against yourself, and you can drown in a lake instead of swimming. Toby leapt in the water because he'd spent hours in stillness first. The pause before that created the possibility of the plunge. And the way I see it now, the way I see it these days is that some moments require a steady breath and presence. Some moments require a full-bodied yes. Both are acts of trust. Both are acts of courage. The real work, the mature work, is not just saying, fuck it, I'm all in all the time. That's just blind naivete. The real work is knowing which one the moment is asking for. And here's the thing that most people don't say out loud and isn't written on any t-shirts either. Trust requires vulnerability, and it requires discernment. You don't throw yourself at the world blindly. You don't just trust everyone. That's not spiritual maturity or whatever. It's naivete. And yes, absolutely. Sometimes you just have to jump in like Toby did and trust that the ground, God, or something, someone is going to catch you, even if it's yourself. And sometimes you have to build muscles of discernment and belief, and you have to gather evidence in your bones from experience, because trust is earned by others and by yourself. And every time you commit to a tiny act of courage, even if no one sees it, you widen your capacity to trust in your own life. And that's another part of trust that nobody teaches you about. It goes both ways. Like so many concepts I cover on this podcast, trust is not about command and obedience. Trust is about a conversation. And I believe modern men, modern humans are starving for this balance. In the hunting world, I see it all the time. I see guys freeze up. I see people overthink, hesitate, talk themselves out of a shot, or they rush it, swing, and they blast away without patience, trying to prove something instead of listening to themselves, the land. It's the same thing with horses. Some folks clamp down with control, tight reins, rigid jaw, full body tension. I mean, just clamping down. Because we mistake domination for leadership. And other people, I mean, they disappear. They collapse into softness. Tell themselves, easy boy, while the animal scans something real to follow. And in life, you see, I think we either play it safe or call it strategy, or we gamble on soul things that we haven't built the spine to hold. Neither is trust. Neither is wild. Both are fear wearing different outfits. A true wild man remembers his place in the world. He knows how to stand still long enough to feel what's true, and then move with that full whole body all in when the moment arrives. He can wait like a hunter and strike like one too. Or he can sit in the saddle, trembling through the tremors. But when he gives the horse his head, when it's time to swim, trust isn't slow. It's fast. Trust is right timing, and if it's married with presence. And this is the work of our lives, right? To grow a nervous system that can hold stillness and a spirit that can leap when it's called to. To know when it's time to stand on the hill and breathe, and when it's time to kick your heels back and ride straight the fuck into the water. That's the nuance. That's the edge that we're living on. And it's where the wildness within us wakes us up. You know, Toby was with me for a while. I think he was with me for about 90 days or so, maybe 120. And over that time, over those few months, we made that ride up to the lake every week. Each time, he stepped into the water a little sooner. Each time with a little bit more confidence. and a little bit more belief that everything was going to be fine. And so I have 3 invitations for you this week. If you want to rebuild trust in yourself and in others, I want you to try this. I want you to do one thing without asking anyone's opinion. I want you to ask chat. I don't want you to ask your mom, your dad, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, whatever. I want you to let your instinct lead. Spending time outdoors, activities like fishing, tracking, hunting, just listening can be huge for this. If it's more comfortable for you, start small. Start with smaller decisions and small wins, and then build up trust in yourself. But be decisive. Make a decision and stick with it. Often our hesitation stems from fear of failure, and the only way we can get over that is by embracing the inevitability of failure. Look, you're going to make bad decisions 100% of the time. You're going to mess up. You're not going to mess up 100% of the time, but you are going to make bad decisions, and you are going to mess up. Most of the time, these decisions are totally fixable. But it's like I was always told. Back when I refereed soccer as a teenager in a far former life, the no call is a call. The non-decision is a decision. So make one you have chosen, not been given by default. Number 2, tell somebody a truth you've been softening, not with cruelty, but with clarity. They will appreciate it as much as you will, right? Holding back and not telling someone your full, authentic truth, it actually creates a division between you. But when you tell them the full truth, I mean, it's like a leap. It's like going all in. It is scary, and it does build trust because it creates an authentic connection and an authentic relationship between the two of you, between two people. And then the next one, when you feel that fear rise up, right? I want you to practice, we'll call it a Toby pause. I want you to wait. I want you to breathe and soften. Let your nervous system settle before you act. And then when you're ready, act. And I mean act clearly, act decisively, and know that you're going to be okay no matter what happens, no matter what decision you make. Because the truth is, trust isn't speed, it isn't fast, it's steadiness. I think a lot of the horses I ride often, in fact, I'm writing a book with a lot of these stories in it. And when I think about Toby, I think about how his fear, it wasn't a flaw. I think about how my fear, it isn't a flaw either. I think about how he learned to trust by taking a step, by ever shaking and fear terrifying step. And I learned that trust isn't given or demanded. It's grown, it's earned, and it's chosen by you. You have to choose to trust. And you have to choose it over and over again, like walking into the water, right? And believe me, I know none of this is easy. But the truth is, trust is the bridge between wildness and control. It's that fine line that we got to walk when the fear is whispering in our ear, man. But when we surrender to trust, but when we surrender to trust, it's the ground that we stand on when we feel shaky, when all the world seems to be trembling. And right now, it does feel like there are a lot of tremors around the globe. If you can learn to trust not only yourself, but other people, you can learn to withstand some of these tremors. Because trust is strength. and it's the wildest courage that there is. So this week, when you feel that doubt creeping in, when you feel yourself wanting to rush or retreat or run, remember Toby at the lake. Just ask yourself, can I pause long enough to let trust find me? And wait and step and breathe. And when it's ready, when it's time, take that leap, take that jump in, and you'll know. You'll learn to trust again. If you made it this far, please know that this podcast is run with support from people like you. So please like, subscribe, leave a review, ring the bell, do whatever it is that you can to support this podcast on whatever platform that you listen to it on. And also, please share it with a friend. And listen, we got some upcoming retreats coming up next year, in the coming months, in the coming weeks. I'll be posting them on my Instagram or at Step Into Your Wild, or over on the website at stepintoyourwild.com. So look, if you want to do work on yourself with horses in the wild, tracking, hunting, fishing, stay tuned for our upcoming offerings. We got many more to come. Thank you all for listening. Once again, this has been Ned Weidner. This is the Wild Lab. I want you to remember, stay curious, stay connected, and stay wild.